either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
What does a podcast see? I mean, really see? Into the head? Down into the heart? Does a conspiracy theory podcast, or does a movie review podcast, see into me, into us? Clearly or darkly. Welcome to the Good, the Bad, the Weird podcast. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris. And if you can't tell, we're talking about Scanner Darkly.
Yes, I have been excited for this movie to talk about for probably about 6 months since we planned this.
Yeah, you and everyone else who is a Scanner Darkly fan is overly excited to talk about this movie. Because the moment one of our friends was like, oh my god, you guys haven't seen Scanner Darkly, it was all they would talk about and would not stop until we all watched it.
Yeah, and we are slowly going through his movies, and one day, Phil, we will get through A Rich Man's Trick.
Eventually.
It is just a 4-hour fucking movie, and we don't have time for it during a weekday.
We really don't.
But for those unfamiliar, Scanner Darkly is based on the novel by the now legendary Philip K. Dick, and screenplay and directed by Richard Linklater, who did School of Rock.
Of course.
And is about a undercover cop who has to be on a drug to track down the drug users, and it's not... He's investigating himself.
He is, and if you are one of those people who enjoy a very realistic dystopian future, this movie's for you. You're gonna love this film. The other people who are gonna love this film is if you're a rotoscope fan, which is where I fall into.
Not just rotoscoped, digitally rotoscoped, which was new for this era compared to Bakshi, which was traditionally rotoscoped.
Yes. This is an incredibly unique looking movie.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, it's a star-studded cast. It's got Keanu Reeves as Bob Arctor.
Yep.
Winona Ryder as Donna Hawthorne.
Of course.
And Robert Downey Jr. as James Barris.
Yep. This is Keanu Reeves. So this movie came out in 2006. So this was after Keanu Reeves was already in his major star role. He was already Nero. Because that came out in 1990. Neo, sorry.
Nero, the Roman leader?
I mean, that's kind of the idea of it, though. Robert Downey Jr., this was kind of right after his big break, but not before Tropic Thunder, because that was 2008. So yeah. He'd come back from his forced sobriety. That was 2003. He'd come back, he'd had a few big movies. Mel Gibson famously bailed him out for pain insurance, because no one would insure him anymore after that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was in this, and then, of course, everybody else possible is in this. And the fun part about this is you can kind of tell who everyone is if you squint just a little.
Oh, no, it's well done. I mean, you can tell that Rory Cochrane is Charles Frick and Woody Harrelson is Ernie Luckman.
Definitely. But in the same way that, they are so cartoonified, because this movie is constantly moving. Everything is constantly shifting. The colors are constantly blurring or moving, or the shapes are starting to blur. That you know who everyone is, but you have a very easy time of losing the face,
mm-hmm.
which is a very unique and interesting way of doing this film.
And it works perfectly.
It really does.
So our sources for today's episode include commentary by Linklater, Keanu Reeves, the daughter of Dick, Issa Hackert, as well as producer Tommy Pallotta, and Dick historian Jonathan Latham, as well as supplementary Philip K. Dick on film by Greg Rickman.
Fantastic. I love the author's name.
Yeah. And so for those who are unfamiliar with Dick, because I don't, and I'm going to abbreviate to PKD because I don't want to keep saying those unfamiliar with Dick.
Who's not familiar with Dick, Nico?
I mean, everyone is a child of Dick.
Yes. We will be shortening his name so that I don't giggle through the rest of of this recording.
Yes. But part of why I wanted to do this film specifically is that even with The Scanner Darkly
mm-hmm.
and all his other films,
mm-hmm.
they were not the staples they are today. They were not... Philip PKD's novels were... He was never successful living. He died shortly before Blade Runner came out.
Yeah.
And his work was considered for kids. I mean, it was published in sci-fi magazines and stuff like that. And also, part of the reason I wanted to do this is science fiction still kind of has that stigmata, or is not stigmata, stigma, same as well as animation. So
True.
Put these two together, and it's just kind of that perfect cluster of that.
Definitely, though I will say that this, especially this version of the story, this animation with these actors really changed this from ever being a, like, young adult story and launches it into the adult sphere.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because this one, it was brought up multiple times, and even in the book, because I did get to listen to the audiobook, and if anyone gets a chance, do it. It's only like 9.5 hours, and it's narrated by Paul Giamatti, so
perfect, fantastic.
It's fantastic. This movie is very much so autobiographical to PKD himself.
Yes, and something that I think they did a good job in the movie of preserving.
Mm-hmm. And it also comes at the end of his career as his 5th to last book he wrote before he died.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah, and we'll get through some of the story since it is so much autobiographical.
Yes.
But before we get into it, Chris, what are we drinking today?
So, with the exception of maybe like Bug Killer and drugs, they really don't consume much in this film, with the exception, of course, of beer.
Yes.
So we have some beer we pulled out of the fridge that we weren't really sure you had, which honestly feels on theme for this movie.
Yeah, Berry Noir, sour ale with mixed berries.
I don't think they would have picked this for the name. I think it just would have shown up in the fridge and they would have drank it.
Yeah, I mean, they all talk about no, they do. They drink, Frick drinks wine.
Well, sure. I feel like that was because he's classy occasionally sometimes.
He bought it specifically because he was trying to be classy. So.
That's true.
Cheers.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Much like every other beer that you forgot you had, and you pull out of the fridge because you just need a beer.
Yeah. But A Scanner Darkly, I love this intro because it starts off 7 years from now, Anaheim, California. And it's weird, itchy, buggy intro. But what's cool about this is the reason 7 years from now was chosen is because they didn't want to set a hard date like other sci-fi movies do.
Which is good, because this is very light dystopia.
Mm-hmm. And I also think it works a lot better than, like, say you load up a Super Nintendo game and they say, in the year 20XX, or like mangas, you see this stuff too, where it's like 20XX, City J.
The other thing that I like about this is a lot of, especially dystopians, either books or movies, suffer from giving something a date, and then when we get closer or past that date, it either doesn't hold up because technology has either not advanced far enough, or has way advanced and now that kind of looks silly, or it dates itself too hard but not in a useful way. Now, some of the classics date themselves purposely, right? Like, they put themselves purposefully in the 40s or the 60s or the 70s to try and, like, emphasize the problem of that time period. Or
be their interpretation of an alternate history kind of thing. Kind of like what PKD did with The Man from High Castle.
Exactly. But with Scanner Darkly, the main focus is the war on drugs, which has been going on in real life for so long that most people don't even realize when it truly started and how much it has not stopped.
Yeah, when it failed. And I'll get into that because there's parts in this movie that, despite this movie being now almost 30 years old.
Yeah, 20 years old.
Yeah, 20 years old.
Unless you're going off a date I'm missing.
Well, even then, like, the source material was set in 92.
Yes.
So, like, even setting that, it's still something, and it was written in the 70s. So, like, this is something that's been going on for, like, 80 plus years.
Yes.
Even just at this point.
Oh, yeah, no. So, the topic of the book was a subject that they knew was going to happen for a long time, because it had already been happening for a long time. And so by making sure that the movie was not too stylized in the home and the fashion, honestly, even in the animation style that was chosen, and by maintaining the, like, intro that the book had of 7 years from now sort of vibe, means that this movie is just as impactful as it was.
The book is heavy. It is specifically says 1992. They just did it this way so that they didn't date the movie itself, which is great too. And, well, partially, we'll get into another portion where they had to date it a little bit. But speaking of that animation, what's cool about doing the rotoscoping is that it gives it that intentionally stylistic choice.
It is one of the only movies that, like, I think most people are going to run across that look anything like this.
There's another one that Linklater did slightly before, and that's where he brought a lot of the crew from. What was the name of that one? It was like, brought it up to someone, and that's like the only film they knew of Linklater. Waking Life.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this wasn't the first use of the technology, but I do think it's maybe the strongest use of the technology.
Yeah, well, it also does well, too, because this intro already sets itself apart from the different type of movie that, with seeing the way Charles Frick is acting, and we actually can see the bugs that are around him, we get this idea that he's off his rocker, there's something to do with the drugs, or...
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, it also blurs the lines between hallucinations and also helps blur the era a little bit too, because we're always going to have junker cars of some kind, whether the bodies change a little bit here and there. We're still going to have them out there. Exactly.
We're also always going to have junker houses, which I think is the best set for this movie possible, because we kind of learn the layout of the house as this movie progresses in a very natural way.
Yeah, well, this is the apartment still.
True. The other thing that I like about the using of this technology is even the parts that are meant to be solid in both real, like in the real world and in the hallucination, it doesn't matter. The art style doesn't change, which is usually how, like, a more traditional, like, drug or hallucination movie will attempt to, like, show that is in change of style, either with slow motion or blurring of an image. This one really doesn't do that. Like, the style is exactly the same the whole time, and it's trippy the whole time.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of the background in this apartment, there's a lot of skulls in the background, which I'm just paraphrasing, or not paraphrasing, guessing here, speculating, that there's a lot of that going on because they bring it up. The whole time this movie, the drug is called Substance D, which is good for branding to keep you understanding that, hey, this is the same drug. But it's also called Slow Death in the book, which is a lot more impactful knowing where this movie ends and, like, also seeing PKD's life. And because there's characters in this movie that are heavily based off of people he knew who... Almost all of them died before this book was written.
Yeah, to the point where the end of the credits include a list from the book, I believe.
Yes.
Listing out all of the people who he knew personally that were impacted.
Yeah, that last author's notes is probably... I love the book, and the movie did a great job of getting as close to the book as they could.
Yeah.
And that, it's just harrowing, and just you can feel... the pain that this man went through writing this.
And I think the movie does a great job of maintaining the integrity of that, so that way when you get to the end and you get that list, and you get a name that you haven't necessarily seen throughout the rest of the movie, it's not an actor that you know, it's not the director, because you've already seen his name for the film, it leads you to eventually finding the novel and wanting to read it. I wanted to read it, I just did not have time between movie review and now.
No, I get it.
But with that said, knowing that other people were not just interested in this movie enough to make this movie A, in the first place, and B, in the style and respect that they did, but also were considering many others of his works and to try to figure out how to turn them into a movie because they liked them so much, is very compelling for me as someone who likes to read.
Well, and that's something that Greg Rickman brings up in his book, is that PKD's work, for the most part, has very rarely, outside of this and two other movies, been as direct translations as it can, because even Blade Runner and Minority Report, all those kind of movies, they take a lot of leeway to give them the Hollywood budget. And Total Recall, too, the Schwarzenegger film.
Of course.
Where they take an idea that PKD has in his books, and then they Hollywoodify it.
Which, don't get me wrong, I love those movies. I truly do. But at no point watching them did I feel like, oh, there's an author, there's a brain behind this story, and I'm interested in that brain. I want to know more and, like, more of the stories that he produced.
I'd say Blade Runner is the one that got me interested in PKD. And unfortunately, I'm not very good at reading fictional books.
Sure.
So... I've never actually read his book until I listened to the audiobook of A Scanner Darkly.
Sure. I'm usually a book first, movie second sort of person. Granted, half the time I don't know the book exists until the movie, just because there's so many books out there, and usually the realm that I read is not usually turned into a movie.
Mm-hmm.
At least not until 30 to 40 years after the author's death. But Scanner Darkly was unique for me in that by the end, I was truly interested in finding more by this author and like reading them, not just because, oh, I want to read the original story of Blade Runner or I want to read the original story of Scanner Darkly, but because I'm interested in his writing style because of this movie.
Yeah.
Which is very rare, I think.
It's very accessible. Getting back to the movie itself, I do like that Frick, knowing where this movie goes, he calls the absolute worst person in this entire film to start talking him down to make all those connections of the outside world of like, oh shit, I need to call Barris. That's the person who's going to bring me down from this drug trip. Yeah,
the man who's multiple people are dying around him, and he's just like, oh no, not again. Yeah, the other thing that I love is the logic behind all of his hallucination actions. Well, I think a little bit over the top in some of the acting and like how they rotoscoped him. I like it though, because you can see the progression of, oh man, got bugs everywhere on me, they're everywhere. Try itching, try changing clothes, try showering. Goddamn, none of that works. I know. Bug killer.
Yep.
Which honestly, by the time you get through the shower and you realize, oh, he's hallucinating and like, this is a probably bad drug trip, with the addition of the rotoscope like constantly shifting on you and like his face constantly changing colors and shifting a little bit. The next scene where he like looks over at his dog and you're like, no, not the dog.
Yeah. Everyone gets roped in. But that's a nice tie into it too, because, and I don't want to do a comparison, book did this, movie did this.
Sure.
But in the book, Frick is actually watching someone else do this. It's another friend of theirs that goes to rehab at the very beginning of the book.
Makes sense.
It's also to show kind of like the infectiousness of an idea or within the drug, or like someone has that drug idea and it carries over to the other people doing the drugs, that kind of thing.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. But also it's a nice juxtaposition to the next scene where we cut to the Brown Bear Lodge speech and just the pairing of an anti-drug speech on Substance D against seeing someone kind of spazzing out over this. And it's very, from the start, this is where we get that dystopic aspect of a Scanner Darkly that...
This is maybe my favorite version of a dystopia as well.
Yes, and that's partially because they went light on the sci-fi with it. The most sci-fi-y thing we have. And granted, for 2006, some of the identification stuff we see down the line would have been a little bit more futuristic, but we see that nowadays.
Yeah.
It's the scramble suit. Which,
granted, is very cool and works with the art style that the whole movie is done in. It blends perfectly. You don't have to worry about it like other dystopian like technology. Like, granted, I liked the Hunger Games. Some of the technology did not translate well from book to movie just because movie looks much better than your imagination can like... Your imagination doesn't need everything, so you have a lot of blanks. There's a lot that doesn't need to work well, right? And then when you get into a movie aspect that looks so realistic and so lifelike, well, now you start to have questions on killer bugs and quicksand and domes. This art style lends into the technology.
Well, yes, and on top of that, it makes in this one aspect is superior to the book, because in the book, it's just a blur. He's a living blur. They don't actually explain what it is.
He's the guy on the CIS, like, missing persons where he's in the shadows and they've got the voice adapter on him, essentially.
Yeah. Well, it also works so well with this whole idea of Big Brother where it's like, trust New Path and our sponsor in the law. And they go through this whole, like, I could be anyone. I'm a drug addict. You could see me on the streets and you would run away from me, but here I am. I have to do this because it's my job. And, like, even him going off script, we get to see a lot of that Big Brother influence of like, hey, you're going off the script here, just work it a little bit and we'll go through this. But also at the same time, like in his speech, it works so well in a still relatively close to 9/11 aspect. And even today where it's like our troops are fighting overseas against the original ingredient of Substance D. It's like
it's like a foreign problem.
Yeah, it's a foreign problem, but it also puts the fear of like, these narcs could be anyone. They're us, it's you, it's your brother, it's your sister. It could be anyone in the street.
And this paranoia usually ends up kind of being weary in, I think, most dystopian films, because the identities of the people is either such a surprise because you've not seen that person up until now, or you get a little bit Scooby-Doo rubber mask sort of situation, whereas in this instance, that paranoia lends in, because again, the art style leads into that like idea of even when we do see someone's face, it's constantly shifting enough for you to have doubts.
Yeah. And what's cool about this, and why I think them going through this suit works really well, is because instead of just telling us, hey, there's someone in this suit, it gives us a person behind it right away.
Yes.
And so we get a face associated with who's actually behind the suit, whereas, like, no one in the room knows as well.
True. And the last thing I want to say about the suit, because this is something that, especially for me, as someone who has a hard time with faces, and this movie makes it even worse, but I like it in this instance. Because it is easy for, even though you know who's in the suit, you have to truly think about it every time they cut to, like, him just outside, like, camera view outside of him in the suit. Because it's so easy for him to become an anonymous, like, blob. Which lends into the whole dystopian police force thing where, like, oh, no one knows it's me, I can do whatever.
Yeah, they're all anonymous blobs at that point.
And because this movie adds to people, if you don't have bad facial recognition like I do, this movie's a great example of what it's like. Because, like, you spend the whole movie kind of doubting yourself a little bit on trying to keep in track who's in what suit. And even if you think you know who it is, you still have that doubt back there because, like, even when you see his real face, it's still shifting.
Who is Bob Arctor?
No one knows, because we also use a lot of different names.
But there's also the line in it, this is what gets people on drugs, very much like the DARE program we grew up on that introduced a lot of our generation of drugs. Again, this book was written so far ahead of its time that...
But it's perfect!
Yeah.
Because this is how much the DARE program, and I know the DARE program has shifted and changed, and is not as present as it used to be. When we were kids, it was very present, to the point where I went to a Christian school with a grand total of, I think, 15 kids at one point. That was like our max. We were shocked. We had that many children. That was our whole grade. It wasn't one class, it was the whole grade.
All drug addicts now. All 15 of you little shits.
I don't know about everyone. I can count for 4 people, and I know none of us are drug addicts. And even we had a DARE police officer come in and give us a spiel. I never learned real history. I learned about Martin Luther. Not Martin Luther King. Martin Luther. For a week every year.
Jesus.
But I took the DARE class. I had no idea what was going on. I did not understand what drugs were. I had no exposure to it, because this is like level of school where, like, we had to convince parents that Harry Potter was not going to send us to hell.
Yeah.
But we also had the DARE program. Like, that's how much the drug war was, like, affecting the youth at the time.
Yeah.
And so this movie's interpretation of it is a perfect balance of both being that level of paranoid, but at a more adult and, like, higher level. So that way it blends eras really well. It could be in the 1970s. It could very easily be nowadays as well.
Oh, yeah, no, exactly. But also the big important thing of this scene is it's to make everything feel as manufactured as you can get.
Definitely.
And also, the off-track bit of the script, it's such a little thing in it that
it's so small, but
it's the first signs that we don't even know this. Like, for a first-time viewing, you don't know that this forgetfulness, it just seems like someone went off track a little bit and they lost where they're at in their scripted speech. But no, it's actually part of, like, him starting to, like, lose it to Substance D. It's the slow death.
And then when you watch it again for the third time, because did I watch this movie 3 times this week? Yes, I did. It's also the very first start where you can start to see him being manipulated by others and not realize that he is being fully manipulated. Granted, he never realizes it. But you as the audience member can first pinpoint, like, oh, we should have known something was weird and fishy from this moment. Because the part that he goes off script on isn't even something that I think a normal, reasonable person would flag as, like, hey, can't say that. Like, it's well within the, like, script speech. And yet, because it is not perfectly controlled, they flag him.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, that's not... I'll get into it. That's not what flags him, because they do it... he does it quite a bit in the movie, too, where he's like, was it the speech?
Yeah, he keeps bringing you back to that idea.
Because it's that paranoid aspect of your job. You're under drugs, but you're also under investigating yourself. Is this
So-
where I messed up? This is the speech that I messed up on, that I'm hyper focused on, much like going back to Frick, being focused on the bugs, which is a good, again, paralleling of we saw Frick, now he had the drugs are bad speech, and now we're back to the results of the drugs.
Yes.
And I love his over-the-top thinking, like, of like, oh, this cop's onto me, I'm gonna pull over, and then he has like these dream, like, thought bubbles of like, I love that visualization. And honestly, it's a technique we see in movies where people do that, but usually it's not done super well. Whereas this, because it's animated, it allows that abstraction of reality to us see what's inside Frick's head.
And I think the first time you watch it, because of this animation style, you are so easily drawn into his head that for a hot second, you do forget that he's actually not, like, this is just in his head. Yeah. Like, you're in the delusion with him. And it's so easy to transition into scenes. And this is something that I think Richard, I'm going to butcher this last name, Linklater, the director.
Yes.
A lot of people who were big fans of him, when I was reading through, like, his fandom pages and stuff, this is something that a lot of them, like, praise him for, is his fluidness with timelines. Granted, there's a strict timeline. We know we have a point A and a point B in time, and we literally go through it. But because he doesn't hold your hand through a lot of it, because he kind of deludes you through, you get this wonderful, like, flowing sensation throughout the movie.
Fun fact, you weren't part of it. This was like 3-4 years ago. I did a review with someone on...
You did? Traitor.
On Linklater. It was the Before trilogy with Laufenstein.
You're a traitor.
Hey, you gave me permission.
I did.
But also, initially, I like Barris because he's that quasi-intellectual guy from high school that never grew up, and he's just constantly, like, spouting absolute bullshit.
Has to be the smartest one in the room, full of crap, and if you catch him in his crap, it's not his fault, it's someone else's fault he got caught.
And the way they link some of the timelines together and the characters is when they start bringing up Arctur, and now we cut to Arctur changing out of his suit, and we see his face on the street. Yeah. But at the same time, he's also being bugged by the DEA getting the data, which this is the visualization of, like, for 2006, I can see this being high tech, but we see this and like there's a lot of people who have issues with this type of technology that is out there right now.
Oh, for sure. And I honestly think that this is one of the few instances where having technology both be unattainable, like the suit is not going to ever be a thing, not in the way that they've shown it, but also have this technology that we well surpassed. We are miles. We don't need humans to do the surveillance. We got computers to do that shit now. Yeah,
and it's on every corner because they're tracking it through an unknown number because he calls Donna, and they bugged Donna's phone. And it's unknown caller, but they're able to track that unknown caller through visual means, and that's the interesting part of it. Is like. Yeah. They don't know who it is, but now they have a face attached to this number that they didn't know previously.
And how perfectly constructed is this dystopia where the whole, like, thing that we joke about completely outside of this movie, this book, this idea, is that you have a little personal FBI agent living in your phone judging your, like, search history all the time. We know that's not probably how it actually is. Maybe if you're really fancy and really dangerous, you have your own personal FBI agent. The majority of us are being scanned by Facebook, and we all know that.
Oh, well, that's actually something from PKD's life that he was obsessed about. Was he said, "Oh, there's an FBI file on me. I know it. I've seen it. And I know it's there." And then I guess eventually it did come out. They did have a file on him, but it was like a few pages.
One page, yeah.
Yeah, it was relatively minimal, which I think you see a lot of that paranoia. But you see a lot of PKD in these characters, and just the paranoia of the time with, like, even Barris talking Frick down. Barris has his own list of conspiracy theories where they're both a bit crazy. I mean, he's wearing an Illuminati shirt on. And even then, like, starts talking about New Path and their intentions. And everyone puts this New Path that we don't really know much about into question right away. And it's a good way to also show how addictive Substance D is, specifically with the line he says, either you've had Substance D or you haven't had it.
Yeah, there's no in between.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's also him trying to track down, like, putting other characters outside of these two spheres, finally putting them together. But also I do appreciate that this is really setting up the groundwork for the paranoia to come in how much shit that Barris talks.
True. Oh yeah, no, true. And I love that all of the conspiracy theories that are brought into this movie are both light enough conspiracy theories that you feel like you know someone who has thought of at least one of these.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they ramble on is the perfect, like, line blurring of, like, the druggy friends who just kind of keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly we never take a hard right turn, but we curve. We're drifting into the right lane.
Yeah, well, this movie also shows it or says it in theory, but then we also kind of see it in practice, because we get the fast forwarding, like, security monitors, which is a nice touch to get to point A to point B montage shot in a cool stylistic way.
Yeah, and, very seamlessly for a cut, too. Like, this whole movie, like, flows so smoothly.
Focusing on the cop just enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're back at their house. They're trying to make cocaine from an aerosol in this very pseudoscientific manner. And they go into it in the book because, like, the chemical ends in "ane," and so he's like, that's how they disguise that it's cocaine. Again, these conspiracy theories that he's putting into action that we never see the results of. We don't ever think
that's because he forgets about it.
Yeah.
Look at this house and tell me that this man hasn't got random crap in every corner of this house because he was trying to do something and forgot about it.
Yeah. Well, it's also a scene to set up the scummy friends that they are.
This is true. They hang out together. They call each other friends, and yet none of them are actually, like, ready to help each other in any capacity.
No, I'd say of the people there, it's Barris who's the problem. Luckman's great, because Luckman brings up multiple times that, hey, this is Barris's house. Not Barris's, this is Arctur's house. We live here rent-free, man. Like, why do you hate him so much?
No, Luckman definitely, I would argue, is at least polite and, like, a friendly dude. However, he's not capable enough to, like, be there for anyone. I mean, half this movie he's, like, barely able to hold himself upright.
Yeah. Whereas
everybody else in the house seems to just be there for convenience sake and wouldn't mind if everyone else dropped dead.
No, just Barris would.
Well, Barris definitely doesn't mind, because we see him prove that later.
Yeah, because we see Arctur cares. Frick is just so out of it that he's kind of past that point of...
Frick at this point doesn't exist. It's just bugs.
Yeah. No, he is that friend who is around, but only...
And maybe at one point they were friends, but at this point Frick's brain is like a scrambled egg on a hard frying pan.
It's getting there. This is your brain on drugs.
This is Frick's brain on drugs.
And then on top of the paranoia that we had a little bit earlier with, or Barris talking about how they don't trust New Path, we cut to the county police, and they're specifically talking about New Path, that they don't trust it because it can't be scanned.
Yeah, that's true.
And it has that. It also has that double feeling of, okay, New Path is sketchy, but also they're the kind of cops who would be like, well, if you weren't hiding anything, then there shouldn't be an issue with us searching, right?
No. The way that they handle police and loosely government-based surveillance in this movie makes everyone in it either, like, I think there's even a line later, like, if I didn't do this work, some shitty person would do it for gains. At least I'm in it for the right reasons.
Yeah, they'd get Arctur. They'd frame him for something.
Yeah.
But Arctur's a good guy. I know Arctur.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the movie perfectly sets up this whole, like, them versus me sort of mentality.
Yes, the suspect everyone, and also giving us the reason to have Arctur's group as the focus.
And it really solidifies this idea that there only is one good cop possible. The one we know about. Because clearly all the other cops they have to either be corrupt or they're assholes. Because
we're like Arctur, or we'll get into that. We're like Arctur. We know Arctur at this point.
Exactly. And, like, granted, they make it pretty clear that there's a very high possibility that a lot of people on the force are just like him. And the way they have it set up makes it so that even as the audience member, you can't identify that.
Yeah. And there's a lot with, because this is also where we get introduced to Frank, his boss. Or is it Frank, or is it
Fred. His senior.
What is Bob's name in this? I can't remember. Hank. Oh, no. Bob or Arctur is Fred. Hank is the boss.
Maybe. I don't know. They're all given generic names, and you just kind of recognize man behind desk equal boss.
Yeah. Arctur is Fred, and Hank is his boss.
Yeah.
But there's also little bits in this where it shows that Arctur is sloppy at his job, where he has these weird hesitations whenever it comes up about himself. And so it's like, of course they're able to start connecting the dots of who you are within this group.
But here's the other thing. That, like, if you watch this movie enough times in 1 week, which I did, and you have the paranoid brain set, which I think if you are a big fan of this movie, you probably are, and I am judging based off of everybody who has ever recommended me this movie.
You know our whole friend group.
I sure do. And I think fully that there is no reason why the actual uppers above everyone does know who everyone is. Mm-hmm. You can't truly think that this is actually, anonymous, right? You are led to believe this is anonymous because our main actor believes this is anonymous. Mm-hmm. And yet, if you watch this movie enough times, you realize that this is exactly like the fake anonymous survey your workplace sends out and then surprisingly fires everyone who gave it a bad review.
Yeah.
Like, of course it's not anonymous. Of course they know who you are, and they're lying to you to get you paranoid and be like, we caught you because of XYZ. No, they didn't. They knew it was you the whole time.
There's lines later on that allude to that as well.
And I love the part where, like, to help solidify your doubt in your mind is when they're like, here's the security cameras watching you do the illegal thing. Mm-hmm. We know you're in this room somewhere. We technically don't know who you are, but you should just edit yourself out when you, like, replace the footage. And even when this movie came out in 2006, I think a lot of people knew that that's not how that works.
Yeah. Well, it's the future. It
is the future. And in the future, it automatically backs up to iCloud. So we know that that's not how that works.
In this future.
Unfortunately,
7 years from now you can, Chris. Remember, this movie's not in our time frame. Our technology is going to look silly if we try and apply it to a Scanner Darkly.
But that's the thing. Scanner Darkly is the perfect future movie because no matter how advanced we get, Scanner Darkly fits in. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's missing a few things, but, like, the roots are there. The base is there. The idea of surveillance cameras having backups or not, like, deleting not be a real thing, being able to record things via just your eyes, all of that might look a little different. Granted, now it's all done with Samsung glasses or whatever new bullshit it is. TikTok glasses, I don't care.
I don't know. I mean, we don't know what 2032 is going to look like. So.
I don't know what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes, let's be real.
You're going to be reviewing this podcast in the next or reviewing this movie in the next 5 minutes.
You hope so.
But from here, we cut to the bike scene, which...
I love the bike scene, because I knew a kid in high school who was just like this.
The studio wanted to cut this, but this scene is probably one of the most important paranoia elements of it, because...
And it perfectly shows you who all these characters are.
Mm-hmm. It finally brings the whole group together, and just this rabbit hole of conspiracy junkies, setting them all up and making them just that little bit dopier than what we thought. Because it's like, okay, well, we know Arctur's a cop, but now we see him, like, in the relaxed junkie phase.
Yes, and it also, I think a lot of us also know people, or have known people, who fit one of these 4 archetypes, like 5 archetypes, depending on how many bugs you're counting. And I knew a guy who was exactly like the bike thief here, where he'd just roll in one day to school, be like, look at what I bought for $5, and then you find out later from him he, in fact, stole it.
You mean Barris?
Yeah.
Barris just comes up with a bunch of random shit. He's awful.
He's so full of crap, and I knew a kid just like him in high school, and so, like, this movie, like, I think you can pick one of these characters. You probably knew someone like this in some extent, and it really helps solidify these as more realistic characters, because this movie is so caricatured that, like, even the actual faces of them are just constantly moving animation. Mm-hmm. Not even like I can, like, get into the world and, like, enjoy a fantasy, anime is real sort of mindset. No, it's so moving that you can't ever, like, live there. You can't ever be in the moment.
Unless it's Cool World, then you can live in that moment.
But see, that's the thing. Cool World had a traditional animated style, so you had an easier time, like, placing yourself in the world.
Yeah.
This one, because freaking even the background's constantly freaking moving.
Yeah.
It is so hard to, like, imagine, like, lose yourself in the moment.
Yeah, there's a couple moments where, like, the character is walking, but, like, the background feels like it shifts behind them.
Like, you constantly feel a little bit seasick. Mm-hmm. And so this scene, I think, I get why they wanted to cut it. It's a little bit useless, but I really do think it helps solidify these characters as humans that you know in some capacity, in some way. which then, like, leads you into this, like, idea of what you think they should be like.
Now it's the exam time, probably one of the best parts of this, which it sets up the danger of the job, and this is where we're told that he has to take the drug to be on the job, kind of like caffeine addicts we see. But I also like it because it's a continued use of this test that he sets up, like in Blade Runner, the empathy test to determine if someone's a synthetic or not.
Sure.
But also the flipping perspection in reality. And the important thing of this scene is, too, there's a couple little things throughout this movie that I didn't pick up on until, like, rewatches, where there's a couple lines of, you might just make it after all, and they're like, well, why don't you just get her a little blue flowers? Like,
they are just subliminally hinting the whole way.
But he's kind of losing it a bit. This is where, like, his personal life is bleeding into work. He's revealing stuff about his real life to these doctors, who, granted, they're not, who knows what they're reporting to.
Who knows if they're even real doctors.
But showing the paranoia of his job, and it's also, like, a little someone we saw earlier who was paranoid, because he's freaking out of, like, why am I doing this test? What was it, the speech I gave?
Yeah, and then when he does get one wrong, he tries to kind of play it cool, like, oh, well, you know, this isn't a very easy test. And they're like, no, it's a very easy test. This shouldn't be hard. And even here, the art style lends itself to it, because, again, you kind of can see whatever you want to see.
Well, and to spoil a little bit of it, and because this is brought up in the book,
of course,
it's the bicycle scene. That's what triggers the test. They explain it in one of the other tests, is like, oh yeah, no, your Hank told us that you were telling a story that you couldn't even get right. So, like, him telling Hank the story of them not getting the bicycle gear ratios or number of gears right is like, this is a basic arithmetic thing that you should know, or someone who's not on an illicit substance or substance D should be able to understand this basic concept.
Ooh, a good one. A good catch.
Yeah. So that's the part of it too, but, like, it's a fun scene too, because he is kind of this, he's kind of an asshole at times, but he's likable because they are like, okay, you're just being silly with us.
Yeah.
It's like, because, like, the pyramid is like pile of plastic dog shit, and it's like, that's kind of funny because that's all that, like, if you get down to it, it is kind of a triangle.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is also the point in the movie where, again, if you've watched this movie way too many times in 1 week, you can start to see if the whole plot is for them to get him addicted and get him thrown into this super secret, you know, farm that they're trying to why can't they scan it? They're already starting to, like, well, clearly he's hooked. We've proven that, and we've brought him in and proven that he's definitely on it, and he's lying a little bit about how much he's doing, how bad it is.
Well, that's the thing. Everyone does that in this movie. There's, like, at one point he says a little more because of job stress. And then, like, Dawn at one point is saying, oh, it's because I do a lot of coke because I'm stressed out. I have to do coke. Or, like, it's always just that little bit extra of everyone. It's that addict mentality of, I'm fine. I can quit whenever. I know my limits.
I'm not doing that much. I'm just doing a little extra right now, sort of thing. And then you can also see them, like you said, with the hinting at the different, like, flowers from the get-go. You can, like, already see the works of, like, oh, they don't care if you're on it or not. They want to see how quickly they can, like, schedule you to be put into an institution. Like, they know the whole time. They're like, this man, you are scheduled, and if you do everything the way we tell you to, and all of our experiments work about subliminally implanting ideas into your head, well, this is going to go well.
Well, it also has, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, because there are, in my mind, a lot of ties to, like, the MK Ultra program, and
I can definitely see
discovery of acid, where it's like, you're following what the government has manipulation, is controlling you from the get-go. They're controlling this entire situation.
No, this is exactly that. I can see it.
And we get a little bit more because we get an informant that has some information for them, and guess who it is?
Look who it is, indeed.
Dickhead Barris.
Trimming his hairs with children's scissors in the office.
Yeah, which... Here's the thing that I think is, like, as much of an asshole as Barris is. He is kind of on the right trail, because he's like, oh, I have a drug ring, and it's like,
He does.
Yeah, he's like, it's Arctur. Arctur's part of this. Arctur's super sketchy. He goes away. He comes back. And like, to be fair, he does have, like, we know from our,
right.
Yeah, from our side, we're like, yeah, Arctur is the sketchy narc that,
yeah,
his whole history is fake.
Yeah, no, that's the annoying part, is even though he is a big ass, he is kind of right, but then at the same time, you can also see the drugs working on him, where the conclusions he has, like, connected to are clearly and obviously the wrong ones.
Okay, so that's the other thing, too, is there's a lot more to this, where it never gets fully resolved, but Barris is trying to basically frame Arctur for the stuff he's doing.
Yes.
So
it feels like he has two plots going at the same time, and cannot keep them straight.
No, exactly. But, like, he's also just, he's there to try and, like, worm his way through. Like, he's like, oh, if I give them Arctur, maybe they'll give me a job, or, like...
No, that's the thing, is he definitely believes that, you know, Arctur is shady. He's probably this high-level ring guy. He's the one dealing all the drugs in the area. But at the same time, I would like to be an undercover cop, because I feel like I'm very qualified and smart.
Yeah.
Yet he hides in the corner like he's a plant at one point.
Yeah. But to be fair, he is also the more realist of the group too, where he's trying to connect real points together, but he's also straight up calling Arctur out for being an addict.
Yeah.
To his face, not knowing it.
Yeah. Well, and isn't that just, the pot calling the kettle black?
Yeah, no, exactly. But also the professionalism that Arctur has to have of, this guy's trying to rat him out, trying to do all this shit, and you still have to be nice to him afterwards.
True. And again, the animation style and the way that the suits work, it is, even though we know who is inside the suit, and we do get flashes of the inside with his face close up, again, the way it's animated, it's easy to lose that identity.
But I think that flashing to Arctur in the suit is a way to keep establishing that this is a person within this suit. It's an actual human just trying to eke out an existence.
For sure. I think the thing that it does perfectly, though, is it reminds you, but it is a forceful reminder, because you are slowly starting to, like, oh, this is, two dudes, two government no names. Oh yeah, no, we know this guy.
Yeah, the funny blur.
Yeah.
Well, this is also where we get that they're gonna bug up the house with holo scanners, some future tech that does some 3D scanning / video recording at the same time. I mean,
which sounds like future tech, but I do use something very similar in my everyday work.
Exactly. I'm sitting there, I'm like,
this is literally how I build buildings.
This is how we scope stores now, is we send a person out to scan a building.
And do you know what my favorite game is when we do that?
Find the person?
Yeah. I love playing Find the Person, because granted, we have some dudes who are very professional at it, and I never see them. And then we have some dudes who, my favorite game is to teams them back, be like, I see you. What you doing in the corner?
Yeah. There's one, and this is back when we were using 3D.
Oh, the old
photos.
version, yeah.
Yeah.
Those were the worst. They never took a good angle.
The person I was scoping with didn't tell me that it can pick up below them that well, because I've never used one before. So I kept, ducking down, so there's photos of me just ducking.
At least you're ducking. We didn't know that we were told that there was a circle, because the example that they sent us had, the little umbrella for them. We were not given the umbrella, and we learned very quickly that the ladies needed to wear turtlenecks. A V-neck straight on looks one way. A V-neck from your tippy top of your head straight down looks a very different way. And it was the worst month for a lot of people.
I bet.
Yeah.
Back to the dipshit gang.
Oh, what are they doing now?
Barris is making a fucking silencer
out of what appears to be toilet paper duct taped around the end of a gun.
Yeah, and after calling out Arctur for having quote-unquote a cachet of weaponry, it just shows the hypocrisy of Barris, but it's a nice way of showing that maybe Barris is trying to frame Arctur for the bullshit he's doing.
For sure. And on top of that, his need to be overly smart, or appear to be overly smart, is when he's trying to frame others for having this stash of weaponry when it's clearly his own weaponry. How much do you want to bet that entire weaponry is just that gun, just the bow with no arrows that they later have.
and
then some piece of absolute garbage that he's, like, rigged to call it, like, a death ray or something.
Yeah, like, what was it, Newton, who, like, left a suitcase to, like, not pay for a hotel bill because he put a death device in it or something.
Exactly. Like, that's the level of delusion that he's in.
Yeah, because, like, even after he fires it, it's like, he's like, oh, that didn't silence it, it just manipulated the waves. And it's like...
Well, yeah, that's what sound is.
Yeah.
You ass.
Yeah.
I also love that they're kind of right, and they kind of prove an extra point here by having this scene, this obviously, like, stupid scene, is he fires a gun in the backyard of a neighborhood, which earlier we hear our main guy rant about, and I think he does a second rant later on, about how this is a nice house, this used to be a nice neighborhood, there could have been families here, there could have been, like, real lives impacted here, and look at it, this neighborhood's shit now, my house is shit now.
Well, they even say in the scene is, like, oh, no one comes here for gunshots, they only come for dead bodies.
And that's both wild, but also, like, what a reality for a large portion of America, because when we went overseas, this was something that we had to explain to our foreign exchange parents, was like, they were trying to warn us about fireworks for a celebration, and we were like, oh, in our hometown we play the game Gunshot or Firework, and it's like, teehee, a funny game, and they were mortified.
Yeah.
And, like, this movie is, like, brought that whole circle back around without even trying. To be like, oh yeah, this neighborhood doesn't call the cops for guns in the middle of the night.
This makes me think of the Childish Gambino music video.
Yeah.
This is America.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. And, like, granted, I don't think Scanner Darkly could have been set in any other country without having to, like, really change how dystopia it is. But at the same time, like, this is why this movie has such a perfect conspiracy theory, like, pipeline, because there is so much of it that, like, does kind of hold true. Like, I grew up and I know many people who still live in towns where, yeah, we don't call the cops if you hear a gunshot unless it breaks your window. Yeah,
or your neighbor shoots some tannerite or something.
I live in the country. I don't count. But, like, no, in neighborhoods where, like, there's streets, there's sidewalks, like, the houses are normal house distance apart. Yeah, like, maybe you put it on the neighborhood app or the Facebook neighborhood group and be like, hey, why are we shooting guns in the middle of the night? With the exception of, like, one old lady who's, like, maybe on the shit list for the cops, nobody calls. I'm just thinking of last podcast on the left and Zabrowski's search for the origin of a bunch of slime. Yeah, Zabrowski's a good example of, honestly, a lot of Scanner Darkly. Yeah, but this scene's also good in continuing Arctur's paranoia of showing that he is leading that double life. True. But also, like, looking in the mirror and kind of losing it. And we get flashbacks of that happier life. And the reason he falls out of it is because it was too happy. It was too ideal. It's the decay of addiction and self-destruction, which it's also noted by his daughter in the commentary that this is very much Dick himself because he had a wife and 2 kids. And very much the same type of stuff of, like, these were his 2 daughters. But also this comes back around of Arctur earlier when he was talking to Hank, he's like, oh yeah, I've got 2 little girls about yay big. Or at the Bear Lodge as well. Yeah. And, like, he also is forgetting that, like, that's been years. They're not yay big anymore. One of them's an adult. Both of them are probably adults at this point. Yeah, one's probably an adult, and one's definitely, they're both either teenagers or adults at this point. They're not yay big. You don't have little girls anymore. Yeah, and there's a nice pacing to this from, like, this point on of, there's a lot of ups and downs, which it seems to be very good at paralleling the highs and lows of addiction, where the night before, everything's awful for him. He's having these horrible memories and flashbacks of his past beautiful life. But now he's on a road trip with his buddies, and they're having a great time until the car breaks down. In the most horrific way possible. But it shows, like, there's that little bit of bad time, but now it's all good times. And, like, even when they're freaking out, it's just like, oh, it's going to be all good. Yeah, and their car accident is another example of, like, they are functioning addicts, right? Like, they are all on substance, and they're having a good time driving on the highway because to them they're not high. And yet, when something goes wrong, it's clear that none of them are actually of their, like, a quick usable thinking capacity.
Nope.
It takes them far too long to realize to either throw it into neutral or turn it off. And, like, even then they finally get pulled over off to the side, which takes, again, none of them are thinking critically about how to, like, handle that situation. They get off to the side and they're like, God damn it. I knew it. Someone's been tampering with this shit. And you're like, no, you drive a honkin' rust bucket. I'm amazed it starts.
Well, and I also really like this scene in a different aspect because they're all on that drug.
Yeah. They're all hallucinating, but differently.
It all becomes an echo chamber of their paranoia.
And you can see it progress when they pull over, because it starts with, oh, the spring's broken, which, yeah, sure, that happens in older cars, to, no, it's not the spring, it's this thing over here, and then, no, it's this thing, oh, it must have come loose. No, that can't come loose. Someone's trying to kill us.
Yeah, but that is what it is. Like,
yeah, no, that's,
but that's the thing is, like, it brings into question of, like, that part we visibly see it's loose and it shouldn't have come loose, but it heightens that paranoia of the man's after us.
Yeah.
And just also it makes me think of, like, those people who are terrified of, like, gang stalking, where it's, like, all in their head. But also I watch this and I'm like, oh, this is just how social media is, like, all the time now. Is like, it's this echo chamber of people saying, not even if it's supposed to be something good or positive, there's still that echo chamber of good job, or this is how my life should be, instead of, like, facing the reality of, like, it's not what this looks like.
Sure. No, this movie does a fantastic job of showing a realistic spiral of paranoia, even with one person or with a group, because we see it multiple times where, like, they're having a good time, there is no problem, and the way that the spiral thinking is laid out is not too overly explained. It's not hand-holdy. And yet you can easily see, just like at the first scene where we could easily see the paranoia where, like, if you had sensible thought, you would realize that the bugs aren't real, because you could investigate, you could make those conclusions, and then maybe do something about it with that thought. But the movie over and over and over again proves to us that with this drug, they are not capable of making that. They are just spiraling into a psychosis, and that paranoia is really the highlight of it.
And it's not really even rock bottom just yet. It feels like
there's always lower than rock bottom.
It's the stages right before, because Arctur, obviously trying to deter suspicion from him, he's like, I'm not taking the drug anymore. And then Barris is like, don't blame the drugs.
True. But at the same time, like, it's one of those things where, like, very briefly at the very beginning, they mention how this drug is so addictive that it's, like you said, you're either on it or you're not. And
no, it's either you're not on it or you've never had it.
Exactly. So, like, when he says, "Oh, I'm not taking it anymore,"
proceeds to pop 2 more.
Proceeds to take 2 more, which, in his defense, in that drug mindset, he was taking 3, and then it was 4, and then it was 3, and now he's down to 2. Which, so, like, as an audience member, you can watch him logic his way through of, like, well, I'm not taking 3. Oh, I'm not smoking. I quit smoking. Okay.
Well, now I'm doing something else instead.
Yeah. It's like, okay, well, you're not smoking. You're still drinking a shit ton a day. You're still doing this drug. And your friends are doing other drugs and this drug. Which, as we know, it is very difficult to be around others who are doing things and you also not have any side effects or, like, also try it. Yeah. Or get involved in any way. It's very difficult to do that.
It's like peer pressure.
No, that is what peer pressure is. Did Dare get peer pressure wrong? 100%. Because I thought random strangers were going to walk down the street and go, do you want to try some drugs, kid? And I'd have to go, no, and then walk away. And that's not how drugs work.
Have you seen that movie Walk Hard?
No. Is that the movie?
No. So there's a bit in it. So Walk Hard is kind of loosely based off, like, Johnny Cash and the old country artist. It's John C. Reilly.
Oh, okay,
and Isla Fisher. Yes. And a good chunk of the movie, like, that's how he gets into drugs, is his buddy is telling him, you don't want a part of this, man. It makes you feel good. And it's like, that's what gets his problem worse and worse. And then the last one of that in the movie is the comedy of it, where he's like telling him all the benefits of, like, oh, you should take Viagra. It gives you a boner. You can actually screw someone now. And he's like, I don't think I want a part of that. And just walks off. Yeah. You would love Walk Hard.
I will put it on my list immediately.
Yeah. But also, the scene is that little bit, after they settle down a little bit, there's that little calm. It's like a mini rest until Barris reveals that, if anyone tries to enter, I've left a little surprise.
Which, great, thanks. You've almost shot someone 3 times in this movie.
Yeah, but it's also his bullshit because he's double speaking like a government stooge of like, didn't I? And he's like,
no,
ooh.
That's it. That's exactly the thing is after he goes in for that first like, oh, I've got information, like maybe I can get a information card at the desk to like sign up, he starts acting like he is a spy in his own home, but it's not coerce. He regularly is like, I've got this whole house under surveillance, and it's like, okay, or oh no, I've got my own informants.
Well, and it's also a double point in this scene too. Is it's not just to say, oh, he's trapped the home, because he's obviously put a note on. We find out later.
Yeah,
but
it's not that sneaky.
It's also his way to try and corner Arctur.
Yeah.
Because he's always playing this game of like being nice to him and then cornering him because he's like, well, why aren't you concerned about intruders? I mean, and Barris is like, I'm concerned because you're wiring my house like it's my property. He's like, well, why should you? I'm worried about intruders. It's like trying to get him to admit to
let him do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, and then that's the other thing is eventually we get to see his contraptions, and we know he's full of shit, but we haven't really been proven how the level of shit that he is, right? Because everyone's done some stupid stuff while you're with your guys drinking in the backyard. Sure, the silencer's a bad idea, but like, yeah, like, meh. And like, yes, we know he's also an ass, and that he's confused and lies. But then we get to him like showing his collection of things he's made, like explaining that he's got the house protected, and then like eventually the surveillance system. So like eventually we see all these contraptions he's put together, and we realize, oh no, he really doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah, he has the biggest words out of the group, but like it's not just like he gets a few things wrong, or oh, it's the drugs. No, he really is that level of piece of shit. Yeah, he doesn't back up what he says, basically. Yeah. But also I love when they do get to their house and they just draw a gun from a drawer and they get the bow without an arrow. The bow one gets me every time. I think it's just hilarious. I love Luckman. Luckman is the best character, and it is a little sad we don't see him that much. He's not in the book that much either. But that makes sense because they probably were friends originally, but at this point they're just drug friends, and you only see each other when you need drugs. Or they're living together. Kinda, but like again, they're drug roommates. Yeah. But it's also their level of paranoia is installing it or spiraling, and it also shows their level of lack of logic where they just get to this point of like, oh well, maybe they haven't bugged the house and they're waiting for us, or they're planning this. Oh wait, there's a hot joint still. This is the man flexing their skills in our face of, this is the one slight thing we changed. And this is the part of the movie where a line from the beginning, like, really makes it extra funny. Because our Arctur makes a comment where he's like, you don't really need me to do this. You could just send a guy to the house once a month and be like, excuse me, I'm the government here to change your security cameras. Ha ha ha. And like, do it, and we probably wouldn't notice. Like, how hilarious. And it's like, it's a joke at the beginning, because like, obviously anybody would notice, but like, I don't think these guys would notice. Well, it also goes down that spiral of, again, like I said, the serial stalkers, because Barris is just like, oh, the truck driver his car must have been bugged because he's part of it. Like, it's that level of like over the top level of trying to explain the most mundane shit. It makes me think of like all those, because I occasionally go down rabbit holes of conspiracy theories because I like the thought experiment side of it. Yes, but at one point they were fun. At one point they were Hollow Earth and dinosaurs. Yeah, but it's always that logic of, oh well, because I don't have evidence to prove this, it has to be this way, or of course they're not going to tell you the truth. Of course it's going to work out this way instead because they don't want you to know. But it's always that simplest explanation of them figuring out, because Donna comes out and she's like, oh yeah, that's mine. I was here this whole time asleep and you guys are loud. Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's the thing that I think works so well, is that mindset for people who are thinking at a level that is not the paranoia, right? The answer is usually, oh, the person trying to prove the thing has the burden of proof, right? Like, if you have this conspiracy theory, it's your job to prove the conspiracy theory. But if you're not thinking at that level, if you are having these problems like these guys are, they don't have to do that because they can just say, well, you don't know. Mm-hmm. And the 1 or 2 times that something does happen that kind of aligns with their conspiracy theory, like their car breaking down or, you know, potentially someone having broken into their house, it just reinforces that idea to them. Yeah, it continues the spiral.
Exactly, and it's not helped because after the scene we go to Station 1287, which is a high-tech surveillance in a shitty room where we see other people doing the same job Arctur's doing. Yeah. And this is where we get the whole edit yourself out of the services. Mm-hmm.
But, and this is the part I think most people, like, if it was going to age it anyway, this is probably the technology that ages it, because again, we don't need people anymore, and also, like, we would at least have cubicles. Okay, so that is the one thing with this. Well, you don't have cubicles because you're always being watched. You don't have cubicles because open floor plan is more efficient.
Well, no, it's not that. It is to build that heightened sense of suspicion. And
for sure.
We're always watching you.
Oh, and you get more work done if you think you're being watched.
Yeah, and they also don't explain the whole... He doesn't go through all the tapes all the time. There's parts that are, like, kind of highlighted to him in the audio logs of him to check the tape versions with it, too. So there's some stuff that's not explained, but it's not necessary. No. But it also is a scene to show that even working in the machine doesn't know that Arctur's part of it. And that gives him even further suspicion. And that adds to that external pressure of, oh, I need to take more drugs because I'm under such much more stress. So, like, even undercover with the scramble suit, no one knows what is going on at the site above. Only the people with the plan know what's happening below them. It makes me think of like H.H. Holmes and his murder mansion, where he hired an architect to do like 2 rooms, fired them, hired another guy to do a different room.
And here's the thing: I'm glad you brought up architecture because this goes beautifully with it. This is how the conspiracy theory level sort of bullshit works, right? Is when you have someone doing that type of like building or plan manipulation, you get, and this is what I think the movie kind of sort of hints at, is you get guys like Arctur who think they're doing it for the right reason, and there are we have evidence of architect people who, like, this was a hobby at one point if you were rich enough in California, was to just build and to like display different architecture. This is why the famous house is the way that it is. She was not crazy. She was not like haunted by ghosts from her husband.
Winchester.
She just was into, like, that was her hobby, was architecture. She was very rich and had nothing better to do with her life. But at the same time, so you get people like that. You get people like Arctur who think that they're doing the conspiracy level bullshit to be helpful, right? Like, he knows that, like, oh, there's like some bullshit, some surveillance, but he also regularly, you can see him using the surveillance for what he thinks is good. He tries to call for when his friend gets, potentially dead. He tries to, like, figure out some mysteries here and there.
That's really close to this, too.
It is.
But that is...
But then you also get the malicious side.
Well, so that's the other part, is that they don't get into the weeds of it, of he is also searching Barris to, like, see what Barris's plans are, because
he thinks it's Barris.
No, he doesn't think it's Barris. So the whole point of all of this is Arctur on the outside is... So there's a duality to Arctur. And he's kind of a double agent because he's investigating himself. Yeah. Because the group, and on the outside, he's also doing some investigation because his role is he's supposed to go up the ladder. Donna is the person who he's supposed to, he's working his way and buying more and more quantities to the point of, like, pretending eventually to be a cell, or he wants to potentially be to the level where he's buying the quantities that she introduced him to that contact. And then that contact introduces him to the next. Yep. But at the same time, he starts to investigate and try and monitor Barris because Barris is doing a bunch of sketchy shit that he doesn't remember. But there's also parts of him, like, losing his memory of doing certain stuff. And maybe just Barris just happens to answer the phone that day and Barris is an asshole. Yeah. So it's that level of trying to seek the truth, but not knowing the truth yourself, in that continuous spiral of, like, I have an uncle who deals with substance abuse and addiction, and one year he bought us, I think it was boxers or something, and my mom said, "Thank you for that." He's like, "I don't remember buying that." Yeah. So it's that level of, like, you're so out of it all the time.
Yeah. Oh, no, for sure. This movie does a great job of trying to explain, like, just because you have your heart in the right place
Mhm.
doesn't mean you're going to be able to do anything.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's like, and the choking scene is a great
Yes.
nod to that too. But there's that line is what we think is of no importance to your work, of like, you're just a cog in the machine.
Mm-hmm.
Do your job and we'll let you know when you need to know.
Yes, which also what a great way of like making sure he stays where they need him to, because if you let someone who you know is a double agent on, if you tell them no, we're not worried about you.
But then we get to one of my favorite scenes in this movie.
Yes.
The fixing of the car.
Oh, buddy.
I love that I love them calling out Barris on their bullshit, because they're getting into the weeds of it. If he's like, well, you need to fix this, this, and this. Oh, that's why this wasn't doing so well.
Barris is over here telling him to put blinker fluid in it.
Yeah, it was overloaded, and he's like, well, it's got this frame and what not in it too. He's like, well, how heavy of passengers do you have with this? We gotta calibrate this. And then they're like giving him all these like really fake numbers. Yeah, it's 500, or it's 300-pound people in the back. He's like, oh, got all my calculations done.
Yeah.
But I also love when he storms and goes into the house, and like Frick shows up and he's freaking out, showing the later stages of Substance D.
Yeah.
But when he comes out, he's got the hammer in his hand. He's like, oh hey, just thought I might need this.
Yeah. The fidgety, the twitchiness here, like, and like the lighthearted of, oh, we're messing around, but at the same time, messing around is how you accidentally bludgeon your friend to death.
Oh no, I fully believe Barris is almost partially, or more than partially serious, of like,
I think so too.
If
you missed, well, you should have blocked sort of mindset.
Well, that's the suspicion that Arctur gets into, of Barris sets up these situations to be reactive to them.
Yes. That's the other thing with Barris is I think that he is a good example of the duality of how Substance D seems to affect people. Mm-hmm. Because we know, like, it causes the hallucinations, the splitting of the two hemispheres talking, and then the forgetfulness, the memory loss, and
don't
the
get me
paranoia.
started on that, because the book's explanation of it is absolutely fucking insane.
Oh, for sure. And we see one example of a character who, like, to us, is clearly the worst of them, right? He's got bugs crawling on him, he's seeing his friends morph into bugs, he's having a rough-ass time. We never really see things from Barris's point of view, but the paranoia, the very questionable and, like, reckless, like, calls that he makes with the guns, and now with the hammer, and, like, almost letting people choke to death, like...
Well, that's the thing, is, like,
And, like, yes, no, it feels conspiracy theory, but at the same time, it makes you wonder if he is just as bad with this, like, as far down and gone with this drug as our other friend over here, who's, like, you know, clearly not reacting well. He's covering himself in bug killer, but...
Yeah, well, it's the way he sets up the situations that makes him just as suspicious as what he thinks Arctur is.
For sure.
Yeah, but I also appreciate, like, the camaraderie that they have in these little moments where once Frick is like, you guys are all fucked up, I'm leaving, you guys are gonna kill someone, and then they're like, oh yeah, you're too far gone in Substance D. Once you're too far, everyone starts talking like Donald Duck, and then they start quacking at him.
Yeah, which, hilarious.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I think that's, again, you know, them calling him too far gone, while I think over half of that group, I think we've all been taking the same amount for about the same amount of time. I think all of you are about the same level of cracked. It's just he, unfortunately, is not around you three as much for you to, like, explain away. So he's the weird thing. He's easier to be like, oh no, you're the one, you're farthest.
So I'll get into that in just a second, because there is something to that. Mm-hmm. Well, one part, they go back in the house and they have this, like, rant about anyone and everyone could be a plant or a narc is what they're talking about. But I like that they bring a Catch Me If You Can, because it's a good way to tie in a real life a man that could be anywhere.
Yes, that's true.
But also, the little bit with this is they had an update to the movie reference of Leonardo DiCaprio, because between the release of the book in this movie, his biopic of that guy came out. So they're like, okay, yeah, we have to make it more relevant. So it sets it past whenever that movie came out.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. But there's also that little hope of getting away with all of it. But that tripping out scene, seeing the bugs, because he's too deep when they were telling that about to Frick.
Yeah.
I love the duality that develops between Arthur and Frick, because Frick is just that little bit further down the spiral, and Arthur is always catching up to him, even if just little bits here and there, because Frick is almost that, what's the literary term? He is the, not precursor, foreshadowing.
The foreshadow.
He's the foreshadowing of what's going to happen to Arthur next.
100%, and I also think that he is, in a way, the red herring, because as an audience, we're seeing that his hallucination is bug-related.
Mm-hmm.
But we, from the movie, don't know what hallucination you get. And the doctors, or the quote-unquote doctors, regularly tell you, like, it could be anything. It could just be seeing the wrong face, seeing the wrong person, or seeing something that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but because we know Frank, and he's the friend, and he's having these bug problems, which I think the friends seem to all kind of be in on.
Frank.
Or, sorry, yes, him.
Frank is Arthur undercover.
Exactly, thank you. So, because we see and know, oh, well, he's hallucinating bugs, everybody else isn't hallucinating bugs, so we must be fine.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, all of them are also hallucinating all the time, and just don't realize it, because it's stuff that's, like, fits in with their mindset, it fits in with their, their conspiracy theories.
Well, it's also not presented to us, because the movie is mostly from Arthur's point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Well, and also there's this duality another duality in the situation, where it brings up imposters and anyone could be the narc. Meanwhile, Arthur is
actually the narc.
Well, Arthur's the arc, but he also knows Barris is a wannabe narc.
Yeah,
and
which means that there's essentially two narcs in the room.
Yeah, they're just trying to out-narc each other.
Which is hilarious.
Yeah, and I also love the line of it. So I guess the moral is to stay away from guys who look the same as us, which is very much, it ties into like that legend of the doppelganger of if you see your doppelganger, it means the end for you, or one of you.
Yeah, you can't touch them or you will die, sort of thing.
Not even, so the doppelganger is like it's the other you that is your foreshadowing of your doom. So seeing yourself, and Arthur looked at himself through the mirror, and in a way, Arthur is his own doppelganger, where he's watching.
He's living two lives.
Yeah, he's watching himself as Frank, and he's watching himself as Arthur, which now he's watching that choking scene, which Barris just watching, building that suspicion that Barris is willing to let any of them die, and technically he didn't kill him, he just didn't lift a finger. It's that whole argument of Charles Manson didn't kill anyone, he just
let them die.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is because this movie is all from one point of view, from Arthur's point of view, who again is a drug point of view and also not a complete narrative, we don't know the full extent of like what was happening in the house, like how spaced out, how drugged out are we when this is happening. He's
very drugged out. He's seeing his friends turn into cockroaches.
Yeah, so like the ability to help, we feel like, oh, he should have done something, anything. When in reality, this man is melting and becoming furniture.
Yeah.
His brain is leaking out his ears, essentially.
And on the other side, we see what the next stage, well, not even maybe what the next stage is, but I love
what it is for some people.
I like Frick's suicide attempt.
I do too, because it's kind of sweet in a way. Like, he thinks of how he wants to be found, and also, I hate the Fountainhead with a burning passion.
Yes, I mean, it's so pretentious. It's just that shithead novel, and he's like...
And how much do you want to bet he has never read it, but Barris told him about it? Okay. And Barris hasn't even read it, he watched the movie.
So there's some things I like with the scene, too, of, like, where he's listening to the radio, and the radio's telling him to do it. It makes me think of, like, Son of Sam, where he lied about the dog, his neighbor's dog told him to do it.
Yeah.
But also, that he's trying to make a big change in the world with the least amount of effort, that where like at least his death will mean something, because some archaeologist is gonna piece together his half-written note or letter to ExxonMobil for canceling his card, and the fact that he was a starved artist or a wronged artist. That's why he died with the Fountainhead, and instead he's hallucinating to this being reading his sins to him for eternity.
Which sucks. And also, like, hilarious. I love how, like,
A million years later,
he
they got to the 10th, or they got to the age of 10 when Frick discovered masturbation.
And I love how, like, at no point in his mind does he think to himself, like, he's so lonely that he doesn't even think to himself that at some point someone will be like, wow, that man's apartment or house reeks so bad we need to call a wellness check, and then they will find his rotting corpse. He thinks that an archaeologist is going to uncover him 100 years in the future. He doesn't even think for a moment that, like, someone's gonna have to, like, eventually clean me up, essentially. Because he's so, like, out of it. He's so lonely, he's so out of it, and he cannot put together a coherent thought.
Yeah, it's really the last bit of comedy before the movie gets serious, because, like, with...
And it's terrible comedy, because, like, this guy he would like to die. Like, he has no qualms about it. He says it straight out. He's like, the death is not the part that worries me, it's how I'm found that worries me.
Well, it makes me think of, like, the darker, like, Swedish humor of, like, A Man Called Ove, where the man's trying to commit suicide, but every time he does, something goes wrong. It's that same kind of humor where it's, like, it's that dark...
And instead of committing suicide properly, he has a space alien tell him his sins.
Well, because someone gave him the wrong drugs.
Yeah, which is sad, but hilarious.
Yeah. But also, it's a very nice parallel of him trying to change the world with the least amount of work. Yeah. And then cutting to Alex Jones, which was perfect for this role.
It really was.
On the corner protesting that substance D and getting bagged by some unmarked van.
Yeah.
Which, there are some good things with this, too, of, like, it makes me also think, again, of social media that's become, like, the new town square of anyone can post their ideas. And he who speaks the loudest speaks correctly. But in this case... he is right.
Yeah.
But
they, like, whisk him away.
Yeah, and I love that line, stop selling out your own species.
Which is a very good line. It is a good line.
But now it's time to ride with Donna, which he doesn't even realize she's there until she's like, hey, dude, I'm here.
Yeah. Oh, man, his brain's so mushy.
And both are a bit paranoid. Both dislike Barris because he's a bad influence, but also he's a scummy guy.
And I like how both of them recognize that when they're hanging around him, they act differently. Like, she calls him out specifically, but they both do. They're both guilty of this. They're like, man, we really shouldn't hang out with Barris. You want to go hang with Barris?
Well, and there's some other things with the scene, too, of, like, she says we all have a habit, and it's that little bit of that, hey, we're all dealing with something.
Sure.
But also, always on guard and seems like her excuses seem very weak. And it just feels like she wants him there, but she can't get too close. But there's also this little bit of probing him again with the blue flowers, hoping for a future on a farm in the mountains.
It's got such good, like, placement for it all to click together at the end. And then again, when you rewatch it, it feels like little Easter eggs for you to find and look for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's all that they even say of, like, it's starting to get bad. Like, this is that ending spiral of things aren't good. There's not a happy future currently in sight.
True.
And also, like, because he also brings home a girl later that night, like, and loses his grip on reality of waking up and seeing Donna in his bed and not this chick. Yeah.
Again, we're hallucinating, but it's not giant cockroaches, so maybe it's not the same type of... Maybe I'm not as bad, you know?
It's also important for, like, the next scene, because this is where it gets really wonky with the perception of reality, because that's also the point of the holo scanner. The holo scanner is not supposed to lie. Yeah. So that's why, like, when he's reviewing the tape and he's seeing that it's Donna in the bed and not the other chick, he pulls it up on the holo scanner, and that holo scanner is supposed to be the point of truth of, if you are losing it a little bit, this is the point this is what's supposed to ground it back, and it does it. This is the end of, like...
And it's the final proof for the audience that the organization that he thinks is the true and the good is lying to him. So, like, from an audience perspective, all of your own personal, like, theories of, like, or conspiracy theories, you can feel, like, justified in having those, like, doubts about either characters or about, like, the job or about, like, who's controlling what, because, like, he's just proven to you, the audience, that they are all lying to him.
Yeah. And also, like, the music, I don't remember most of the music in this movie outside of, like, the beginning, up until this point where there's this nice low hum that's just building the suspense.
So the music was done by Graham Reynold, and most movies have a soundtrack that go with them, but they are not usually the entire movie's length of soundtrack. There is silence, there's dialogue parts. Scanner Darkly is kind of an interesting one. It is almost, from start to end, musically scored. There was a bunch of back and forth of what's, like, big songs should be included. There was obviously a lot of punk bands that were, tried out, and, like, there was some rework as far as, like, from what I understand, from test A to final production.
Mm-hmm.
The music was apparently very, like, something that a lot of people liked, but not enough to, like, propel it anywhere.
Yeah.
So, like, it got good reviews. A lot of people really praised it for music. Never won a lot for anything like that. And, like, the CD was released. It wasn't, like, a high seller, like, I don't know, the Shrek CD. But, like, I was impressed by how much of the music was included for the movie, especially because the movie visually is constantly moving. It makes sense for it to also audibly always be moving. So always feel a little bit extra busy. Which was a nice touch.
Yeah, but that's the thing with, like, music in movies, that at times where you notice the music, great, but at other times where, like, I think it's almost better when the music is kind of that backdrop that you just go with the flow and don't recognize, or it's not, like, stands out too strong,
And this is a good example of a movie where the music is there for a lot of it, you just might not recognize it, and not in the way of, like, other movies we've talked about where, like, the music is almost just soundboard noises that, like, were claimed to be music, which, fun, but arguably not music.
Yeah.
This is one of those instances where, like, it's there for most of the movie, like, much more than a normal movie would have, especially a movie like this, where it's mostly dialogue. There's not action happening, there's not, like, explosions to break away from or anything like that. But at the same time, it works so smoothly that you really don't pick out any one specific song or one specific, like, theme that goes for the whole movie, which I think is why the CD didn't sell very well by itself, because unlike, say, like, Inception or Lord of the Rings that have, like, that one big song, or in Lord of the Rings' case, several big songs that, like, really stand out and you can kind of enjoy by itself and then remember the movie too.
Yeah.
This one, it all just kind of blends together, much like the animation style.
Which works well in multiple layers of this movie, so...
Yes.
Now we get the the final testing, and...
It's kind of a diagnosis.
I do like not knowing up from down. We see him trying to test it out, but people changing around him too. He's asking if he got the girl flowers.
Yeah,
again, bringing it back up.
Yeah, and the hallucinations are getting more problematic. Like they're starting to interfere with his day. Yeah,
he can't tell the two objects are the same from their feel. It's like it makes me think of that parable of, like, the three blind men who touch an elephant. One feels the trunk, it's a hose. The other feels the leg. Oh, it's a tree. Feels the tail, it's a brush.
Yes. No, and I also like that what science is truly presented in this movie, at least the movie version, again, not the book expert, that's your job today. The science is correct enough that I don't think anyone really can complain, which is good because this is a movie for conspiracy theory thinkers who would pick that shit apart. Yep.
Well, it also starts getting into, like, the heavy paranoia of he's now kind of talking like or thinking of Barris in the third person and even of himself, where he's like, oh, why would they want, if I don't do this, someone else would do the job. They'd frame Arctur for something. And I know Arctur. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's starting to, like, separate himself from being Hank and Arctur.
Yeah, which it's turning back to him of, like, now he's, like, realizing how far he spiraled, where the house, this is a house, it should have a family.
Yeah, he can't even remember it's his own drugged in.
Yeah, and also wondering if his watchers are even human when he is the watcher. And, like, does the machine understand our feelings? Does it gaze into us clearly or darkly?
Yeah, which is a great line. But also, like, the fact that he's having these thoughts and still cannot piece together, like, oh, I know who that is because it's me. Like, these are simple thought progressions, and I think this step is important because we need to get to full brain melted level.
Yep, because...
And if we went from even a few scenes before this to that immediately, I don't think audiences would believe it.
Oh, yeah, no, because it picks up a lot from here because there's the diagnosis and him facing the truth, where they're asking, how much substance are you taking?
And he doesn't really know.
Not much, more so because of job stress, and he's starting to hear the chitters of the bugs, and now he's also having to face Barris again because now he's got evidence of terrorism.
Oh, boy.
And I do love this scene because it all implodes for Barris.
Yeah, which we all kind of want it to happen because Barris has been an ass this whole point. But again, this is all from his point of view, so like...
It's also the duality of him and the other characters, where his plot is going to follow what happens to these other characters, where Barris's world is imploding, but also Arctur is too, because one, Barris is... They're like, oh yeah, you weren't actually there to hunt down this drug ring or actually watch Arctur. You were there to collect evidence on Barris because we know Barris is tied to some heavy organizations. Again, building up that, hey, Barris was trying to frame Arctur for this.
Sure.
But also that Hank's like, yeah, I know you're Arctur.
But, and like, I love that, again, he like tries to logic it through to him. He's like, well, I know it's you because of this and this and this.
It's like, there's three of you. It's going to be one of you, and it's not Luckman, and we know that we were trying to track down Barris, so because of the three people, of course it's going to be you. But I also think there's like those nice little nods of like whenever they bring up Arctur, he's always defensive of him.
True. But here's the other thing. We know that they're lying to him. We've had this proven. And so after like you've watched this movie enough, the thought of literally all of that, the entire thing, all the way from Barris being like this big dude who's connected to these other people, all the way down to why they know that it's him, is actually just bullshit. They know it's him because they hired him.
Yeah. And
they've been tracking him, and it's Barris. Sure, Barris may be part of some big ring that we don't know about, but probably not, because out of all of the friends that he has, we see Barris almost the entire time. It's probably not Barris. They probably were just getting him addicted long enough to be able to send him to the farm.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly, because this is the part where it's revealed that he's being charged for willingly becoming an addict and not reporting. No one forced you or dropped it in your soup, which again made me think of like the MK Ultra a bit.
Sure.
The government creating its own problems with that, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. That he should have faked it. All the other agents do. Which
is also a lie. Because we know it's not true. Because otherwise, why would the addicts know that they could all go be agents?
Yep. And like he's like, I'll cut it cold turkey. But it's like, nope, you can't. Again, going back to the line, you've either never had it or you're lying.
Yes.
But this is where he's really losing it when they call him Arctur, and he's like, I'm who? It's like,
yeah,
I have...
It's proof that his brain is frizzled.
Well, even more so of like, he's like, I have 2 little girls. And Hank's response is, I don't think you do. So what were those flashbacks? Were they Substance D flashbacks, or were they like really his? And
we will never know.
And also, there's weird stuff that starts popping up in Hank's scramble suit where there's like a skull that's there for a fraction of a second, and it's just like, oh, that all the heaviness of learning you were just a tool to get to Barris, and the whole point wasn't even investigating for the drug. That is just absolutely like horrible. Like I can't imagine like your world absolutely collapsing like that.
And the worst part about it is he proves that he can't comprehend that that's what's happening.
Nope.
He truly does not understand what is happening to him.
Nope, because he's carted off, and this is where we learn. I love the way the movie does it better than the book, because the book is a lot longer for this last like 10 minutes of the movie.
Sure.
And I'm so glad they shortened it, because it's full of a bunch of random stuff we don't really need.
Sure.
But this is where we learn that Hank is Donna.
Of course.
It's one of the best oh shit moments of like, oh, so she's also the double agent working in this.
Yeah.
Which Winona Ryder played both roles.
She did great.
We can have someone else play Hank, and she's like, no, I want to do it.
Yeah, it'd be perfect.
But it's also a really heartbreaking moment, because she's even like, it's not fair, but it has to be this way. Because like it's like, okay, that's why she was pushing him off, is because she does love him, but she can't, because he's technically her job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is when we finally get to New Path, which you know it's not going to go well, because the people at New Path don't give a shit. They're like, oh,
no, they are rude from the beginning.
Yeah, Substance D ate his head, another loser. But there's that little hope of when Donna says anybody can win.
Yeah.
And there's some really great moments in this too, because we see Frick's in rehab, and there's like, it's like, okay, Frick is actually doing well. Maybe there is hope for him, even though Arctur is much more gone. Also, he's called Bruce now.
Yeah, they keep changing names, which is not helpful for me.
And there's a line in this: the living should never be used to serve the purposes of the dead, but the dead should, if possible, serve the purposes of the living. Which
is sad, but also like trickles back to his attempt at his suicide. Was he wanted to do good in his death, but like he physically could not think of a good way to do it.
It's not necessarily that. What it is it's the indoctrination of New Path.
Oh no,
they're putting
100%.
They're putting these into their mind of, oh, you're so fried, you're basically dead. You should serve the living. We're not gonna serve you, but you should serve a purpose now.
And how perfect is it that all of this, and granted, the scene is fairly short where they show the rehabilitation center, which would be the most public, and if anyone did make it back out, would be the part they talk about, right? Mm-hmm. So by having these sayings be brainwashy, but also you can understand why and like get behind it, like, oh, of course you want to like help perpetuate the good of those who are still with us. Like, you don't want your death to be meaningless.
Yeah.
Sort of mindset. And like when they go through the different therapies and all the stuff that people are parroting back in kind of like the group talk sort of way, where unfortunately it seems like only maybe one or two of them are actually thinking their own thoughts. Mm-hmm. You can kind of see like, oh, well, I get why they're trying to be helpful, which sets you up for the next scene.
Yeah, which we get the reveal that Audrey, who was Donna previously, is wondering how Bruce is doing, and this is where we're revealed that he was a double agent on top of being a double agent of they forced him, like the whole thing of her saying no one forced you to become an addict, but I also feel like they drugged him so much too, and they sacrificed him without him even knowing that he was going to be their sacrifice, so that way they could bring in evidence. And like that's when she's crying, it's like, it has to be, I'm sorry, but it has to be this way. And they go into it of like, only someone so burnt out, and also even if there is that flicker, he has to know nothing, because if they interrogate him and he has that flicker, he might reveal that they're searching, and so that's their only way into New Hope. And it was just it's that beautiful reveal. It's
very smart writing to like have all of that explanation come back around, because the worst part about it, the part that formerly known as Donna talks about, which for a lot of people I think stuck with them very hard, was even if at some point he had, without her knowing, said, yes, I want to become this super double agent, I want to be able to be the one to get in there and stop this drug from happening, the amount of drugs he is on, the way that his brain is so fried it's not even an egg anymore. It is separated back into whey protein.
That's milk, but...
Well, if you scramble an egg hard enough, it starts to make water. It squeezes the water out of between the proteins.
But whey protein is an after milk. Yeah.
I know. But he is so far gone that he can't step back out. He can no longer agree. He can no longer continue to agree to be this double agent. And so even if formerly known as Donna doesn't know that, we, the audience, do. And that's why I think at the end, when he does take the flower, it is both hope and also travesty in your mind, because he kind of sort of isn't all gone. And like that's the hope I think of a lot of people who know an addict, is like you don't want who you knew to be gone.
Well, and also that's why this ending scene of him working in the cornfield spraying and finding the flowers, there's that re-emphasis of, hey, I'd like to let's leave the city, let's move to the mountains, let's get a cabin. There's a field of blue flowers.
There's so much like just subliminal messaging to try and like get it into his head.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like it works because there's that little bit of hope at the end, and even then there's a beautiful line or a set of lines in this movie at the end. You're seeing the flower of the future. No, but not for you, Bruce. No, you had too much of a good thing already. Get up, stop worshiping. This isn't your God anymore, although it once was. And it's that ending line of just like the hopelessness of like they know that they're purposely killing people, basically, by
Yeah.
selling them poison. But also that picking the flower and like, I'll have a present for my friends at Thanksgiving. No, you know fully well that he's not picking it because he's going to try to take down New Hope. He's just doing it because he's like, he wants to bring something for his friends.
Yeah, which is all sweet. But here's where my last conspiracy theory brain went, was when he picked it and put it in his boot, I went, oh, he's not going to Thanksgiving. He will never go back. Well,
so the thing, okay, I'll get into it from the book a little bit.
Sure, no, it's just the movie conspiracy that I have.
Yeah, the book ends with him, or like the last line he says before the author's notes is, well, I'll bring this for Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. I think he's gonna get away with it because, and that's why I want the ending of this movie to be hopeful.
Yeah, I do too.
Because it would mean that it's a reflection of Frick being the shithead he is. Yeah. And trying to be a pretentious change the world. Mm-hmm. Arctur is going to actually change the world. He's not going to he's not going to become, or he's not going to die like, or he's not going to end up like Frick wanted to end up. He's True. Even if it's unintentionally. And it makes me hope that he gets that little bit of spark back, but we don't know because like it ends. Yeah, it's up to you to decide how the future goes for Arctur.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful ending.
And also just that dedication. Like if you get to listen to the author's just dedication, he's not condoning the use of drugs. He's just condoning the system that punished him and his friends for wishing to continue to play. And so it's a dedication to those who played too much in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. No, it's a very touching dedication.
Yeah, because he even puts himself in it too. It feels a little bit of it all, not a suicide note, but just like an end of an era of like maybe he kind of knew he was on that downward spiral of like, it's a sad autobiography.
Well, and it's also a recognition that the person that he was, he cannot go back to being. That person no longer exists.
Well, he would die later of amphetamine use, because that's the weird thing with this movie too, is, and not just this movie, but this book is, according to his diary, this is the only novel he wrote when he wasn't on amphetamines.
Interesting.
It's such a profound movie because, I mean, even with the conspiracy theories along with it, it's one of my favorite. I mean, I love They Live, The Network, and the Mel Gibson movie Conspiracy Theory.
Of course.
But this one works in a similar but different way of, it took the Big Brother approach and focused it down to a very narrow aspect to give us our attention, a pinpoint focus.
Yes. And to give us care. To give us a reason to care and a hope.
And also doing the subject of addiction in a very almost PSA manner.
Yes.
But it made it interesting and didn't have to like twist the source material to try and take the idea and make it interesting. But it also just holds so well because it doesn't do it in a pretentious way. And we're also still seeing this 50 years after the opioid epidemic. Or no, we're still seeing it with the opioid and fentanyl epidemic 50 years after the writing of this book.
Oh, no. This is a book and a movie that managed to hit home on the topic that I don't think the way that the world works will ever truly end. And it is a heartbreaking topic, and I think the movie handles what the book took to heart and took so seriously and was such a personal topic, and I appreciate how serious it took it, because it would have been very easy to overly scare and overly add the conspiracy level stuff, right? Like, we could have really played into the government aspect here. We could have taken the focus off of, all of the friends that he kind of has.
Turn it into a more action movie like Total Recall or Minority Report.
We could have even taken the new path and made it more of an interest and had more like agents trying to get into there. And it still would have had a similar message, but it would not have had the same personality. It would not have had the same heartbreak.
No. Realizing
that this is for some people a reality, and for the author, this was his life.
Yeah, and I think that's what this movie has going for it. It has heart.
It really does, but it ties that heart with both hope and heartbreak, and is that combination that I think truly makes Scanner Darkly stand above. yes, it visually looks very interesting and is very unique in that sort of way. And it has some phenomenal acting by actors that you definitely know and is fun to see as a much younger version of themselves. But the story itself, the way that it was originally written in the book and then translated for this movie, really is what makes this movie special.
No, exactly. And I think that's the thing, is like the visuals of it for me are the hook of it.
Yeah, that's what gets you started in the movie. And
then you get really down into the nitty gritty and just, I think it's one of those movies where we bring it up where Del Toro says that, like he says with Pan's Labyrinth, it's what you take out of the movie. And I think there's a lot to take out of this movie, but it's also how your perspective on what the future of is. Like, I mean, that's the biggest point of the movie is, I personally think it wants you to have a hopeful ending to it, but you have that conspiracy theory of he doesn't make it out, because that's the fear.
That's the fear of it always, isn't it? Like, that's the fear of addiction, is that you want the person to make it to the other side, but there will always be that fear of them not making it, or a relapse, or something terrible happening.
Exactly. He forgets he has the flower in his boot.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that is the last piece of excellence that I want to harp on, is that this film at its core is not a conspiracy theory movie, is not truly even a dystopian film.
It's dystopian.
I would argue that it is realistic. It is the current world with some future technology put on it, which unfortunately is dystopian. We don't want that. It's not the utopia we would like to live in, and it's not the hard-cut documentary of truth, right? So it technically falls into dystopia because of that. However, where I think a lot of dystopias and a lot of conspiracy theory movies fail is that they do not manage to create a true human connection to a real world problem, where at the end of the day, the conspiracy dystopian of the government being the problem here, it teaches the lesson of that you cannot shame the person, you have to shame the system that got them there.
Yep.
And that is what makes this movie, for me, the stellar example of a dystopian and of a conspiracy theory, because a lot of others only really, truly are there for either a giggle or for fear. And this is one of the few ones that manages to balance the fear with a hope.
Yes and no, because that's the other thing that Dick brings up in the author's notes, is that ultimately it is still a decision. That's why that's why the whole part of no one told you to become an addict and you didn't admit it. It's like you still made the decision to continue this. Like, and it is I get it. It's difficult. I mean, I've struggled with my own substance addictions, and I mean everyone does. Whether it's, I mean, some of them are better for you, but like working out, that can be an addiction. Workaholics, like everyone has their way of dealing and coping with the world.
Oh, for sure. It's just in this very narrow scope of the conspiracy theory version of movies, which tend to lean on an impossible thing happening and an impossible person saving the world, which, granted, that is kind of what happens in this movie, but this movie manages to change that from being just about like this bigger than life problem and like how this one hero saved the world, and brings it down to a more realistic conversation piece about how the real world is, which for book dystopia, for the genre of books for dystopia, that's what they are, right? Well, and I think movies for a lot of time miss that entirely.
Well, and there's something you said with that too, of he's not this big time hero.
No.
He's kind of the everyday man like John McClane in Die Hard, but there's a line when the other detective's talking to Donna at the end, where he is like, if we're lucky, we can take them down, but in this whole history of everything, we'll be lucky if we're even a footnote in some B-level history book. And it's like, that is the sad thing, is like that. There's a line from Doctor Who that I really like too, that I think personifies that perfectly, is great men are forged in fire. It is the privilege of lesser men to light the flame. Yeah. And that's exactly what Bob Arthur's character is. He is this nothing footnote in the history that if you hope enough, he's going to change the outcome of his world.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Chris, good, bad, weird rating.
I understand why some people would visually say this movie is weird, but I would argue that it's not. I would argue that this is just a good movie. This is a wonderful example of computer rotoscope, and it does so in not just an artistic for artsy sort of mindset. It does it with an intention, a purpose, and a very good effect. The end result is exactly what you need it to be. The acting is phenomenal. I think the music is pretty good. For me, this movie is a solid good.
Yeah, I'm going to go with good weird and not for the visuals.
Okay.
Because, again, like you said, the visuals of this movie were done intentionally.
Yes.
And it does such a good job of blending reality and what we're perceived, because we don't know what the truth is. Even in the end, we don't know if that holo scan really was showing Donna and that computer's faulty.
Yeah.
And was it scanning it, or was it actually scanning into Arctur at that point?
Yep.
I put it as weird because it's got all those weird offshoots that you can just pull from the movie and go down those rabbit holes of, oh wait, maybe this is part of the LC. Is Donna actually like dropping something into his drink? Because
there's a lot of unknowns.
Well, in the book they talk about, oh, they mix substance D and they lace it with a bunch of other drugs and stuff. So they're creating their own like drug cocktails and stuff. But at the end, it is a solid movie, and it's just those offshoots that give me the weird rating. Not to discourage people, because it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I do think that visually, I think for some, it will feel a little odd trying to get into it, but it is worth it once you get going.
Yeah. So, Chris, would you recommend this movie?
Yes. Yes, I would. Granted, again, it's not for every single person, but I think for the majority of people, it is for you. Even if just dark conspiracy dystopians aren't normally your thing, I think this one is worth a watch. Yeah,
I have to completely agree with you. I wholeheartedly love this movie, and I'm glad our friend showed it to us.
It has been good. It has been good.
It's one that does come up to my mind relatively frequently. Same with Network that he introduced me to, and I forced you guys to watch They Live years ago. So.
Exactly.
But it's that time of the show. Season 6 bingo. Almost end of the season.
Almost.
Chris and I are playing bingo in Yukon 2. Rules for our players are simple. 1 stamp per card per episode. Cards can be found on our social medias at TGTBTW_podcast on Instagram and Threads, as well as TGTBTW podcast on Twitter, or X, whatever the fuck it's called now.
Yeah, Twitter.
Feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. You use any of the 3 bingo card variations, but each stamp must be associated with an episode of Season 6. Second place gets to choose a deep dive because first place is taken, as well as 1 micro view. Third place gets to choose 2 micro views. Fourth and fifth place get to choose a micro view. So feel free to share at us on our social media or email us for participation. Rules are different for ourselves. We've already completed our bingo cards, so...
We have. We're playing for funsies.
I get good, Chris gets bad, and I get weird. So we get 2 stamps for deep dive, and we're trying for the alternate bingo just for funsies.
Yeah, just for fun.
So, Chris, what do you got?
I'm going to go with an easy one right out the gate. Off my good card, I shall be going with tits. Because the fact that he gets away with having them not just on his screen, full blast for the entire office to see, but then has 3-dimensional ones. And I know it's supposed to be zooming in on her face, but it does look like he's just zooming in on her tits.
There's actually a part in the book where they're talking about one of the other agents in the room. They're like, "Hey Frank, you get to watch some people do some weird sex. It's the worst part of the job, watching people fuck."
Oh no. And then again, I'm gonna take an easy one out. And on my weird card, I'm going to say, what did I just watch? Specifically for the man turning into a cockroach. Because I think that is the point of the whole scene.
Alright. I'm going to go with drugs, because that's the only way to open your mind.
You know what? I'll give it to you.
From the weird card, and then good use of self-discovery from the main character.
I will also take it.
Yeah.
Granted, that self-discovery does come in the form of his brain leaking out his ears eventually, but you know what?
So,
he discovered much.
Mostly
did. That he's paranoid.
I mean, we all are a bit, so...
That's the joy of that movie, though.
Yeah, but... It's that time to say fare thee well to movies of rotoscoping, of fire and ice, of senseless shots of bottoms and sensible social commentary.
True.
We have a few movies of days past to discuss that are coming up, as well as a guest episode next week. So look forward to that. But anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.